A single candle trembles in a narrow chamber high above the sleeping city. Outside, the wind from Blackwater Bay presses softly against shuttered windows, carrying the distant cry of gulls and the dull rhythm of waves against the quay below Agan's high hill. Wax gathers around the bronze holder in slow, patient circles, while maps, sealed letters, and carved lion paperweights wait untouched upon a heavy oak table. Every corridor of the Red Keep has grown quiet. Guards change their watch, servants bank the fires, and even the ravens have settled into silence. Yet one room still holds light because one woman has not finished thinking. This is the story of why Cersei was the smartest player in the Game of Thrones, told not as a tale of perfect victories, but as a slow journey through the choices that shaped one of the most feared queens in the history of Westeros. Settle in, let the pace grow gentle, and allow the walls of the Red Keep to rise around you as though you were walking them yourself in the stillness before dawn. If you've traveled with these stories before, quietly note which night you've reached. If this is your first visit, simply call it Night 1. Long before swords were drawn in the War of the Five Kings, before Eddard Stark rode south from Winterfell, and before dragons returned to the world across the narrow sea, another battle had already begun. Inside the mind of a young Lannister girl who understood one painful truth: power belonged to men unless a woman learned to seize it another way. Why did so many brilliant men spend years dismissing Cersei Lannister, only to discover too late that she had already anticipated their next move? The answer does not begin with King Robert, nor with Joffrey's coronation, nor even with the secret of her children. It begins decades earlier at Casterly Rock, the ancient seat of House Lannister, where gold filled the vaults beneath a mountain that overlooked the sunset sea, and where expectations weighed more heavily than armor. Lord Tywin Lannister ruled the Westerlands with cold precision after restoring his house's strength, following the decline under his father, Lord Titus Lannister. In those halls, weakness was remembered for generations, while competence was treated as the smallest acceptable standard. Cersei entered that world in 266 AC alongside her twin brother, Jaime Lannister. The twins arrived together, yet from the beginning they were expected to follow different roads. Jaime would inherit the weapons, the lessons of command, the admiration reserved for noble sons, while Cersei would one day become a valuable marriage alliance, another carefully placed piece upon the board of dynastic politics. Their mother, Joanna Lannister, was remembered throughout the Seven Kingdoms as graceful, intelligent, and one of the few people capable of speaking honestly to Tywin himself. Those early years were among the happiest either twin would ever know, though neither could have understood how brief they would be. Everything changed in 273 AC. Joanna died giving birth to Tyrion Lannister, and grief settled over Casterly Rock like a winter fog that never completely lifted. Tywin never remarried. He withdrew behind an even harder shell of discipline and silence, devoting himself almost entirely to restoring and protecting the prestige of House Lannister. Tyrion grew up carrying the blame for a death he had not caused, while Jaime and Cersei lost the one parent whose affection had balanced their father's relentless expectations. The family remained one of the richest in Westeros, but wealth offered little warmth within those stone halls overlooking the western sea. As children, Jaime and Cersei amused themselves by exchanging clothes and pretending to be one another. The story survives in Cersei's own memories. Jaime found the game entertaining because they looked so alike, while Cersei found something else hidden inside it. For a few stolen moments, she could experience the freedom given automatically to boys. Servants bowed without question. Training masters expected confidence. Doors seemed to open before a son of House Lannister that would remain closed to a daughter, regardless of intelligence. It was a child's game, but it revealed an adult frustration long before Cersei possessed the words to describe it. Years later, she would remember those exchanges with surprising clarity. She did not envy Jaime because he was stronger with a sword. She envied him because the world assumed he deserved authority before he had done anything to earn it. Tywin reinforced that lesson without intending to. He instructed Jaime in lordship, warfare, and inheritance because that was the custom of the Seven Kingdoms. Cersei received education suitable for a noble lady, learning courtly manners, household management, heraldry, and diplomacy, valuable skills that nevertheless pointed towards serving another ruler rather than becoming one herself. The injustice settled quietly inside her, not as sudden anger, but as a patient certainty that the rules themselves were flawed. Was Cersei shaped more by prophecy or by the world that surrounded her every day? Many readers point immediately to the visit she made as a girl to Maggie the Frog, the fortune teller who lived near Lannisport. In the novels, Cersei and her companions seek out the old woman in secret, curious to glimpse their futures. Maggie speaks with unsettling confidence, answering questions that Cersei has barely finished asking. She foretells that Cersei will become queen, but not forever, because another queen, younger and more beautiful, will cast her down and take all that she holds dear. She also predicts that King Robert will have many children, while Cersei will bear only 3, each crowned with gold and wrapped in golden shrouds. Those words echo through every stage of Cersei's life in the books. The prophecy is never treated as a simple curse descending from the heavens. Instead, it becomes something more dangerous because Cersei believes it. Every attractive young queen becomes a possible enemy. Every political rival appears connected to Maggie's warning. The fear grows alongside her influence until it colors decisions that otherwise might have been made with greater patience. Whether prophecy controls the future or merely shapes the choices of those who hear it remains one of George R.R. Martin's most enduring questions, and Cersei stands at its very center. Yet there is another influence that deserves equal attention, one standing only a few corridors away from her childhood chamber. Lord Tywin rarely praised his children openly, but he demanded excellence from all 3. He expected discipline, composure, and absolute loyalty to House Lannister. Cersei admired him deeply, even when she feared him. She watched how he solved problems without sentiment, how rebellious bannermen such as Houses Rain and Tarbeck had been crushed decades earlier, until the reigns of Castamere became both song and warning throughout the realm. Strength, in Tywin's eyes, prevented chaos before chaos had a chance to spread. Cersei absorbed that lesson completely, though not always in the way Tywin intended. She concluded that mercy often invited rebellion, hesitation, encouraged betrayal, and visible authority mattered almost as much as justice. Later readers sometimes compare her to her father and find only differences. Tywin calculated more carefully, while Cersei often acted more emotionally. Even so, the similarities remain striking. Both believed the survival of House Lannister justified extraordinary measures. Both understood that reputation could win battles before armies ever marched. Both recognized that once fear disappeared, rivals became bold. The candle continues to burn as the darkness beyond the windows begins to soften almost imperceptibly. Somewhere below, the first kitchen fires are being lit inside the Red Keep, though the city itself has not yet awakened. A young girl in Casterly Rock cannot see any of that future. She does not know of Robert Baratheon, the Iron Throne, the War of the Five Kings, or the children whose crowns will weigh so heavily upon her heart. She knows only that every lesson around her whispers the same quiet message. If the world refuses to let you rule as a son, then you must learn to rule by understanding people better than the sons ever do. Why did Cersei accept a marriage she neither desired nor respected when she understood from the beginning exactly what kind of man Robert Baratheon was becoming? The answer begins not with affection, but with victory. In 283 AC, Robert's rebellion ended with the deaths of King Aerys II Targaryen and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, the fall of the Targaryen dynasty after nearly 3 centuries upon the Iron Throne, and the rise of House Baratheon. Lord Tywin Lannister, who had remained outside the war until the final days, marched to King's Landing beneath Lannister banners, gained entry through deception, and sacked the city. Sir Jaime Lannister slew Aerys inside the Red Keep, earning forever the name Kingslayer, while Gregor Clegane and Amory Lorch murdered Princess Elia Martell and her children Aegon and Rhaenys. When the smoke settled, Tywin offered his daughter as Robert's queen, binding the richest house in Westeros to its newest king. From every outward appearance, the marriage solved the political needs of both kingdoms. Robert gained the wealth of Casterly Rock, whose gold mines had long financed the ambitions of House Lannister. Tywin secured his family's place beside the Iron Throne after years of serving as hand to Aerys II, only to fall from royal favor. The wedding united 2 victorious houses that had stood on opposite sides only briefly during the rebellion's final hours. Lords across Westeros saw stability. They saw prosperity. Almost no one asked whether the bride and groom possessed even the smallest foundation for happiness. The books make clear that Robert spent much of his life haunted by Lyanna Stark. Though Lyanna had died in Dorne near the war's end, Robert continued to speak of her as the woman he had truly loved. Cersei later remembers asking him on the night of their wedding feast whether he had ever loved her. Robert, exhausted by wine and celebration, reportedly whispered another name before falling asleep. That name was Lyanna. Whether the memory has been sharpened by years of resentment or preserved perfectly, Cersei never forgets the wound, because from that night onward she stopped expecting affection from her husband. The disappointment did not arrive all at once. Robert remained physically imposing, still carrying echoes of the young warrior who had crushed Prince Rhaegar's breastplate with his great warhammer upon the trident. Yet peace changed him. Hunting replaced campaigning. Feasting replaced discipline. Wine flowed through nearly every evening, while governance increasingly fell upon Jon Arryn, Hand of the King, whose steady administration kept the realm functioning for almost 15 years. Robert loved contests, loud laughter, and companions who demanded little from him beyond another cup. Cersei quietly observed something different, a king who preferred escaping responsibility whenever someone else could carry it. She also recognized a dangerous habit in the court surrounding him. Lords and counselors learned to flatter Robert instead of correcting him. Renly Baratheon amused him. Grand Maester Pycelle reassured him. Varys delivered information without openly challenging royal impulses. Petyr Baelish steadily expanded the crown's debts, while presenting impressive numbers that few cared to examine closely. Jon Arryn remained the one consistent restraint upon the king's excesses until his death in 298 AC. Cersei watched these men for years, discovering that influence rarely belonged to the loudest voice in the council chamber, but to the person who best understood everyone else's weaknesses. Was Cersei simply fortunate that Robert ignored so much, or did she build an invisible fortress around herself while others mistook neglect for safety? The greatest secret in Westeros did not emerge through reckless passion. It rested upon decades of disciplined concealment. Jaime remained within the Kingsguard, bound by vows that prevented marriage or legitimate heirs, but kept him constantly near the royal family. The twins continued the forbidden relationship that had begun in childhood. When Cersei's children were born, Joffrey first, then Myrcella, then Tommen, they inherited unmistakable Lannister features: golden hair, green eyes, and fair complexions. Those details mattered because House Baratheon possessed an unusually consistent appearance throughout recorded history. In the line descending from Orys Baratheon through Steffon Baratheon and Robert himself, black hair and blue eyes appeared generation after generation. Even when Baratheons married into houses Targaryen, Durrandon, or Estermont, Jon Arryn eventually noticed the pattern while studying noble lineages in the massive genealogy titled The Lineages and Histories of the Great Houses of the Seven Kingdoms. Eddard Stark would later reach the same conclusion after reading the same volume. Cersei understood the danger years before either man pieced together the evidence. One of the more revealing moments in the novels arrives through Cersei's own reflections. She remembers bearing Robert a child early in the marriage, a dark-haired infant who died shortly after birth. The television adaptation omits this detail, but in the books it adds another layer to her story. After that loss, Cersei resolved that Robert would never father another living child upon her. Every child thereafter would be Jaime's. She was not merely pursuing forbidden love, she was reclaiming control over the future of the dynasty she inhabited, but did not truly trust. That decision transformed succession itself into a political weapon. If Joffrey inherited the Iron Throne, House Lannister would effectively possess the crown through blood as well as marriage. Tywin never openly acknowledged the truth, and there is no evidence in the novels that he knew with certainty. Yet the arrangement served many of his ambitions regardless. Jaime remained close to power. Cersei became indispensable as queen. Their children stood first in line ahead of Robert's brothers, Stannis of Dragonstone and Renly of Storm's End. The appearance of stability concealed an explosive truth that could shatter the realm if ever exposed. For nearly 17 years, remarkably few people uncovered the deception. Stannis Baratheon grew suspicious after Jon Arryn began investigating Robert's bastards, including Gendry in King's Landing and Edric Storm at Storm's End. Rather than confront Robert directly without proof, Stannis withdrew to Dragonstone after Jon Arryn's death. Varys almost certainly knew far more than he admitted, as he usually did, though his own plans centered upon restoring a Targaryen claimant rather than protecting Robert's heirs. Petyr Baelish benefited from disorder regardless of its source, making silence profitable. Each powerful player possessed different motives, but Cersei's secret endured because their interests rarely aligned. As the years passed, the Queen learned something that many rulers never fully grasped. A kingdom is not governed only by armies, castles, and laws. It is governed by attention. Robert rarely noticed the small movements inside his own household. He trusted habit more than observation. Cersei never made the same mistake. She watched servants exchange glances, measured loyalties among household knights, remembered careless remarks spoken during feasts, and quietly sorted people into those who could be used, those who could be bought, and those who could never truly be trusted. Before the first page of A Game of Thrones begins, she has already spent almost 2 decades studying King's Landing as carefully as another scholar might study an ancient manuscript. Why did Cersei recognize Eddard Stark as a mortal threat almost immediately, while so many others saw only an honorable northern lord arriving to serve the king? The answer lies in the difference between 2 kinds of intelligence. Ned Stark excelled at judging character, loyalty, and justice. Cersei excelled at recognizing incentives, ambition, and weakness. When Lord Jon Arryn died suddenly in 298 AC under circumstances that even Grand Maester Pycelle initially described as illness, King Robert rode north to Winterfell seeking his oldest friend. Cersei understood before the royal procession even crossed the neck that the balance of King's Landing was about to change. The journey itself reflected the enormous weight of the Iron Throne. Robert traveled with Queen Cersei, Prince Joffrey, Princess Myrcella, Prince Tommen, his brothers Renly, and a large royal household, along with Sandor Clegane, Sir Barristan Selmy, members of the King's Guard, and countless wagons carrying supplies. It was one of the largest royal progresses seen in years. For Robert, it was a reunion. For Cersei, it was an inspection of a family that had remained largely outside southern politics since the rebellion. Winterfell stood almost 1,800 miles from King's Landing, and its rulers thought differently from those raised beneath the intrigues of the Red Keep. Ned Stark accepted the office of Hand reluctantly. His reasons were deeply personal. Jon Arryn had served as a second father to him during his youth in the Vale, and the circumstances of Jon's death troubled him. His wife, Lady Lysa Arryn, had fled the capital with young Robert Arryn and sent a secret letter accusing House Lannister of murder. Unknown to Ned, that accusation itself had been engineered through Petyr Baelish's influence over Lysa. Before Ned ever reached King's Landing, Littlefinger had already placed the first pieces upon the board. Cersei knew none of Lysa's hidden motives, yet she correctly identified the danger presented by Ned himself. He was not corrupt enough to be bought, vain enough to flatter, or ambitious enough to tempt with greater honors. Such men were difficult to predict because they acted according to principles instead of convenience. In King's Landing, principles could become liabilities. Every conversation, every investigation, every unanswered question carried the possibility of uncovering the truth about Joffrey's birth. Cersei did not underestimate Ned because he was honorable. She feared him precisely because he was. There is an interesting contrast between Cersei and several other members of the court during these early chapters of A Game of Thrones. Renly Baratheon quickly judges Ned to be useful, but politically inexperienced. Varys watches quietly while collecting information from his little birds. Peter Baelish immediately concludes that Ned can be manipulated through his trust in old friendships. Cersei reaches a different conclusion. She understands that an honest man who refuses compromise becomes extraordinarily dangerous once he discovers an unpleasant truth. She does not need to admire Ned to respect the threat he represents. Why did Robert's death unfold so quickly once suspicion began to grow? The answer is often simplified into a hunting accident. But the novels reveal a carefully prepared chain of events rather than mere chance. Robert loved hunting boar in the King's Wood south of King's Landing. Before his final hunt, Lancel Lannister, Cersei's young cousin and squire to the king, repeatedly supplied Robert with especially strong wine. Lancel later confesses this role to the faith, admitting that he obeyed the queen's instructions. Robert still managed to kill the enormous boar that gored him, a final reminder of the immense physical strength that had once won him a kingdom, but his wounds proved fatal. Notice what Cersei did not do. She did not send assassins into the forest with poisoned blades. She did not stage an obvious murder that might provoke immediate civil war. Instead, she nudged an existing weakness. Robert already hunted recklessly. Robert already drank heavily. Robert already ignored those urging caution. By encouraging habits he had chosen for himself, she allowed circumstance to become her accomplice. It was a colder form of strategy than open violence because it left uncertainty behind. The king lingered long enough to return to the Red Keep, where Eddard Stark received his final instructions. Robert commanded Ned to serve as protector of the realm until my son Joffrey comes of age. Ned quietly altered the wording of the royal will, replacing Joffrey's name with the phrase, "my rightful heir," hoping to preserve lawful succession once the truth became public. Sir Barristan Selmy witnessed the signing. Renly Baratheon was present. Grandmaster Pycelle sealed the document. Yet even in that solemn chamber, events were already slipping beyond Ned's control. Meanwhile, another investigation had reached its conclusion. Ned had visited Gendry, the apprentice armorer in Tobo Mott's forge, after Varys directed him there. He questioned the prostitute Bara's mother and learned of one of Robert's many illegitimate children. Finally, he spent hours reading Jon Arryn's genealogy, tracing marriages between great houses over generations. The pattern became unmistakable. Every known Baratheon child inherited dark hair. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen did not. The realization struck with the quiet certainty of mathematics rather than rumor. When Ned confronted Cersei inside the Godswood of the Red Keep, one of the most remarkable conversations in the novels unfolded without a single drawn sword. Beneath ancient trees imported from the Riverlands, surrounded by silence instead of guards, Ned openly accused her of incest with Shymi and declared that he knew the royal children were not Robert's. Cersei did not deny it. She admitted the truth with startling calm, even asking him, "When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die? There is no middle ground." It is one of the rare moments when both participants speak honestly, yet each completely misunderstands the other's next move. Ned believed mercy would prevent unnecessary bloodshed. He urged Cersei to flee King's Landing with her children before Robert returned from the hunt. He hoped to avoid executing innocent children for the crimes of their parents, remembering the murdered Targaryen infants after the sack of King's Landing. Cersei heard something else entirely. She heard that the one man capable of exposing her secret had announced his intentions before securing power. Instead of escaping, she accelerated every plan already in motion. Mercy, from her perspective, had revealed an opening. Was that the moment Cersei won the struggle against Eddard Stark? Or had the outcome been decided much earlier? By the time Robert breathed his last, the Queen had already secured the loyalty of key gold cloaks through Janos Slynt, maintained Jaime's presence near the center of power, and understood that Petyr Baelish valued opportunity above honor. Ned believed legal authority would command obedience once the truth became known. Cersei believed men followed whoever could reward them today and protect them tomorrow. One trusted the law, the other trusted human nature. As dawn finally reached the towers of the Red Keep, only one of those beliefs was about to survive the day. Why did Eddard Stark lose the struggle for the Iron Throne even after discovering the truth, while Cersei emerged from the same crisis with her son crowned king? The answer cannot be reduced to Petyr Baelish's betrayal alone. Littlefinger certainly played a decisive role, persuading Janos Slynt and the City Watch to abandon Ned at the critical moment. But betrayal succeeds only when the ground has already been prepared. Cersei had spent years learning which institutions truly held power inside King's Landing. She understood that royal decrees meant little if the men carrying spears answered to someone else. The City Watch of King's Landing, better known as the Gold Cloaks, numbered close to 2,000 men during the opening of a Game of Thrones. Their commander, Lord Janos Slynt, owed his position less to noble birth than to political convenience and personal ambition. He had risen through the ranks because he proved useful to powerful patrons. Gold, advancement, and survival shaped his decisions more than honor. Cersei never mistook him for a loyal friend. She only needed him to believe that her victory would also become his. Ned attempted to secure the throne according to law. Armed with Robert's final will and supported by a handful of loyal household guards under Jory Castle's surviving officers, he entered the throne room, expecting established institutions to obey the late king's wishes. Instead, the room filled with shifting loyalties. Renly Baratheon had already fled the city after Ned rejected his proposal to seize Joffrey and the royal children by force. Stannis Baratheon remained on Dragonstone, gathering support, but absent when events demanded immediate action. Barristan Selmy stood with the King's Guard, sworn to protect the crown rather than interpret succession disputes. Cersei stepped into that uncertainty with complete confidence. Joffrey Baratheon entered wearing the crown, accompanied by Queen Cersei, Sandor Clegane, Sir Meryn Trant, Sir Boros Blount, Sir Preston Greenfield, Grand Maester Pycelle, Varys, and the assembled court. When Ned presented Robert's will, Cersei calmly ordered the document torn apart. The gesture carried enormous symbolic weight. She was not arguing over legal wording. She was demonstrating that authority belonged to whoever possessed the strength to enforce it. Moments later, Littlefinger's dagger rested beneath Ned's chin as the gold cloaks turned against the hand instead of protecting him. Many readers remember Littlefinger's whispered words, "I did warn you not to trust me," yet it is worth lingering on Cersei's own role in that triumph. She correctly anticipated that Baelish valued opportunity above principle. She knew Janos Slynt could be rewarded. She recognized that hesitation among her enemies created space for decisive action. None of these men loved her. They did not need to. She had built a coalition based on immediate advantage rather than lasting affection, and for that single crucial day, it proved enough. Why did Cersei spare Sansa Stark when executing Eddard would almost certainly provoke the North? At first glance, the decision appears compassionate. In truth, it was strategic from beginning to end. Sansa remained the publicly acknowledged betrothed of King Joffrey. As the daughter of the imprisoned Lord of Winterfell, she represented an extraordinarily valuable hostage whose existence complicated northern resistance. Arya Stark escaped during the confusion surrounding Ned's arrest, but Sansa remained within the Red Keep, isolated from her family and increasingly dependent upon the mercy of people who rarely intended to show it. Cersei consistently viewed noble children through a political lens. Myrcella and Tommen were heirs whose survival protected House Lannister. Sansa became leverage over Robb Stark, who had called the Banners of the North after receiving news of his father's imprisonment. Across the Riverlands, Lord Tywin gathered Lannister armies at Harrenhal and the Golden Tooth, while Ser Jaime Lannister commanded forces in the field. Every prisoner, every marriage alliance, every hostage became another piece in a conflict that was expanding beyond anyone's ability to control. Cersei understood the value of captives because dynastic wars often turned upon bloodlines more than battlefields. The execution of Eddard Stark, however, revealed one of the first serious cracks in her political control. In the novels, both Cersei and Varys expect Ned to confess treason publicly, renounce his claim regarding Joffrey's parentage, and accept exile to the Night's Watch. Such an outcome would remove a dangerous rival, while preserving enough honor to reduce northern outrage. Ned delivers the confession exactly as arranged before the Great Sept of Baelor. Then Joffrey unexpectedly commands Sir Elend Payne to strike off his head. The moment shocks almost everyone present. Varys immediately understands the disaster unfolding before him. Cersei attempts to intervene, urging her son to reconsider. Even members of the Kingsguard appear uncertain. But once Joffrey has spoken, Sir Elend obeys without hesitation. Ice, the ancestral greatsword of House Stark, falls beneath the headsman's hands, and Eddard Stark dies before a crowd that had expected mercy rather than execution. The decision transforms a tense succession dispute into a war that consumes nearly every kingdom in Westeros. This episode deserves careful attention because it reveals both Cersei's intelligence and its limits. She had built an effective system for gaining power, yet she had not fully mastered the young king through whom that power flowed. Joffrey inherited her pride but lacked her patience. He mistook cruelty for strength and spectacle for authority. Cersei repeatedly tried to restrain his impulsive decisions throughout a clash of kings, but she discovered that creating a king and controlling one were entirely different challenges. The crown amplified Joffrey's worst instincts faster than anyone anticipated. Was Cersei already beginning to realize that the greatest danger to House Lannister stood inside her own family? The answer grows clearer as the realm fractures after Ned's death. Robb Stark is proclaimed king in the north by his bannermen at River Run. Stannis Baratheon declares Joffrey illegitimate and claims the Iron Throne as Robert's lawful heir. Renly Baratheon also crowns himself king with the support of House Tyrell and much of the Reach. Balon Greyjoy prepares another rebellion from Pike. Within months, 5 rival kings will claim dominion over parts of Westeros. From the windows of Maegor's Holdfast, the city still appears secure. The Red Keep rises above the Blackwater Rush, its thick walls built by Maegor the Cruel centuries before. The Iron Throne still stands. Inside the Great Hall, gold cloaks patrol the streets, ravens carry royal commands, and Joffrey wears a crown forged for kings. Yet beneath that appearance of order, every road leading away from King's Landing carries armies, messengers, and vengeance. Cersei has won the first and most dangerous contest for the throne, but the victory has opened a war far larger than the one she believed she had just ended. Why did Cersei rely so consistently on fear when many of Westeros's most successful rulers had balanced strength with generosity? The answer becomes clearer once the War of the Five Kings truly begins. From Cersei's perspective, every display of mercy invited another challenge. Robert's relaxed rule had allowed debts to multiply, ambitious counselors to enrich themselves, and rival claimants to gather support before anyone reacted. She concluded that hesitation had nearly destroyed House Lannister once already. If the realm feared the crown, it would obey first and question later. As Queen Regent for King Joffrey Baratheon, Cersei suddenly occupied the center of government. She presided over meetings of the small council, received ambassadors, managed correspondence with great lords, and coordinated the defense of King's Landing, while Tywin Lannister campaigned in the Riverlands. Few regents in Westerosi history inherited such a dangerous position. Robb Stark marched undefeated through the western Riverlands after victories at the Whispering Wood and the Battle of the Camps. Stannis Baratheon prepared his claim from Dragonstone. Renly Baratheon gathered the immense strength of the Reach and Stormlands. The Iron Throne faced enemies from nearly every direction at once. One detail often overlooked is how rapidly Cersei adapted to governing without Robert. The king had frequently ignored council meetings or left tedious matters to Jon Arryn. Cersei attended carefully because she understood that information itself was a weapon. Reports arrived daily from Harrenhal, River Run, Dragonstone, Storm's End, White Harbor, Gulltown, and Old Town. Ravens carried news of harvests, troop movements, piracy, weather, and noble marriages. A queen who absorbed those reports possessed advantages unavailable to even the greatest battlefield commander. She also recognized that symbols mattered almost as much as victories. Joffrey appeared frequently before the court wearing crown, crimson velvet, and cloth of gold. Royal justice continued to be dispensed beneath the Iron Throne. Coins still bore the king's authority. The royal household continued its elaborate ceremonies, even while armies burned villages only weeks away along the King's Road. Maintaining routine reassured many merchants and lesser nobles that the monarchy remained functional. Cersei understood that panic could spread through a capital faster than any invading army. Why did Cersei refuse to release Sansa Stark, even when doing so might have softened northern resistance? Many observers focus on cruelty alone, yet her calculation followed established political practice throughout Westerosi history. Noble hostages had long been used to secure loyalty. During the reign of Aegon the Conqueror and his successors, defeated houses often surrendered heirs rather than castles. Theon Greyjoy himself had lived at Winterfell for nearly a decade after Balon Greyjoy's failed rebellion, raised by Eddard Stark as both ward and hostage. Cersei viewed Sansa through exactly that tradition. At court, however, fear increasingly became public spectacle. Joffrey delighted in humiliating Sansa before assembled nobles, ordering Ser Meryn Trant and Ser Boros Blount to carry out punishments that exceeded every reasonable political purpose. Cersei occasionally intervened, not because she had suddenly become compassionate toward House Stark, but because she recognized diminishing returns. A frightened hostage retained value. A broken or murdered hostage invited vengeance. This distinction reveals one of the clearest differences between mother and son. Cersei wanted obedience, Joffrey wanted entertainment. The Queen's interactions with Sandor Clegane offer another revealing glimpse into her understanding of people. Known throughout the realm as the Hound, Sandor possessed a fearsome reputation, earned through battlefield service and brutal efficiency. Burned as a child by his brother, Gregor Clegane, he despised the false chivalry represented by brightly polished knights. Cersei trusted him with dangerous assignments because she believed his loyalty rested upon straightforward rewards rather than romantic ideals. Unlike many courtiers, Sandor rarely disguised what he was. To Cersei, predictability often mattered more than virtue. Did Cersei truly believe love was weaker than fear? Or had her own experiences convinced her that affection inevitably failed? Throughout her life, nearly every close relationship had reinforced that lesson. Joanna died when Cersei was still a child. Robert neglected and humiliated her. Tywin respected usefulness more readily than tenderness. Even her bond with Jaime, genuine though it was, increasingly became entangled with secrecy, guilt, and political necessity. She had witnessed admiration disappear almost overnight in the courts of kings. Fear endured longer because it demanded less trust. This outlook shaped even seemingly minor decisions inside the Red Keep. Household servants who disappointed her found themselves dismissed or punished. Courtiers who displayed hesitation quickly lost influence. Noble families that supported rival claimants discovered their lands threatened with confiscation. Cersei believed consistent firmness prevented larger rebellions later. It was the same principle Tywin had demonstrated decades earlier against houses Rhaen and Tarbeck, though without his extraordinary patience. The difference lay not in objective, but in timing. Tywin usually waited until every advantage belonged to him before striking. Cersei often struck as soon as she perceived disrespect. Yet while she concentrated upon visible enemies, another contest was quietly unfolding inside the council chamber itself. Tyrion Lannister had been captured by Catelyn Stark, escaped execution in the Vale after his trial by combat, marched with the mountain clans through the Riverlands, and fought beside his father at the Battle of the Green Fork. Now acting under Tywin's orders, He was riding toward King's Landing to serve as Hand of the King in his father's absence. Neither brother nor sister fully understood that their greatest political rival during the coming months would not be Stannis Baratheon, Renly Baratheon, or Robb Stark. It would be each other. Why did Tyrion Lannister become the one opponent Cersei could neither intimidate nor fully predict, despite sharing the same blood, the same upbringing, and many of the same political instincts? The answer reaches back to the death of Joanna Lannister in 273 AC, the event that fractured House Lannister long before the War of the Five Kings. Cersei blamed Tyrion for their mother's death almost from the moment he was born. Tywin never openly forgave his youngest son for being a dwarf, though he acknowledged Tyrion's intelligence when circumstances forced him to do so. Jaime alone loved both siblings without reservation, standing uneasily between two people who understood one another all too well and disliked each other even more because of it. When Tyrion arrived in King's Landing as acting Hand of the King, he did not announce himself with soldiers or grand speeches. Instead, he quietly assumed the powers his father had granted him and immediately began testing everyone around him. He dismissed Janos Slynt from command of the City Watch, stripped him of office, and sent him to the Wall to join the Night's Watch. Sir Jacelyn Bywater, a veteran who had lost a hand during the suppression of the Greyjoy Rebellion, replaced him as commander of the Gold Cloaks. The change was significant. Tyrion removed a man whose loyalty had been purchased and replaced him with one whose reputation rested on discipline rather than bribery. Cersei understood the insult immediately. Janos Slynt had played a central role in securing Joffrey's throne, and Tyrion had discarded him without consulting her. More importantly, Tyrion had demonstrated that the powers of the Hand exceeded those of the Queen Regent in many practical matters. He now controlled appointments, finances, military planning, and access to the king. The rivalry between brother and sister became official, though neither needed to declare war openly. Every council meeting, every audience, every sealed letter became another contest for influence. The small council itself reflected the unstable politics of King's Landing. Grand Maester Pycelle had served since the reign of King Aegon V and privately admired Tywin Lannister above every other living lord. Lord Varys continued presenting himself as a humble servant of the realm, while secretly advancing a far older conspiracy centered upon the restoration of House Targaryen. Petyr Baelish managed the crown's finances despite debts that had climbed to staggering levels through loans from House Lannister, the Faith of the Seven, and the Iron Bank of Braavos. Tyrion recognized almost immediately that he sat among allies who were not allies at all. Why did Tyrion choose deception instead of direct confrontation when measuring the loyalty of the council? His famous experiment with Princess Myrcella provides one of the clearest examples of political intelligence in the novels. Tyrion privately presented 3 different marriage plans to 3 different counselors. He told Grand Maester Pycelle that Myrcella would marry Robin Arryn in the Vale. He informed Varys that she would wed Theon Greyjoy's sister Asha, though Tyrion knew that proposal was impossible, making it an obvious falsehood. Finally, he suggested to Littlefinger that she would be sent to Dorne to marry Trystane Martell. Only one version reached Cersei. She confronted Tyrion in fury over the Dornish proposal, proving that Pycelle had carried private information directly to the queen. Tyrion responded with startling speed. He arrested Pycelle, shaved his beard, confiscated his possessions, and imprisoned him within the black cells beneath the Red Keep. It was not merely punishment. It was a demonstration that Tyrion could identify hidden channels of communication and sever them without hesitation. Cersei had relied upon Pycelle's quiet loyalty for years. Overnight, that advantage disappeared. Yet Tyrion made a revealing mistake of his own. He concluded that exposing Pycelle had secured his position, but Cersei adapted instead of collapsing. She simply shifted more of her attention toward other servants, household officers, and members of the Kingsguard. Unlike many defeated opponents, she rarely repeated exactly the same strategy twice. This flexibility deserves attention because it distinguishes her from several rulers throughout Martin's histories. Cersei seldom abandoned her goals. She merely searched for another route once the first had been blocked. Why did the struggle over Princess Myrcella reveal both Cersei's greatest strength and one of her deepest contradictions? Tyrion genuinely believed sending Myrcella to Sunspear would strengthen the alliance with House Martell. After years of mutual suspicion following the murders of Princess Elia Martell and her children during the sack of King's Landing, under the arrangement, Myrcella would be betrothed to Prince Trystane Martell, the younger son of Prince Doran Martell. Politically, the proposal was sound. It offered Doran a future connection to the Iron Throne while reducing the possibility that House Martell would support Stannis or Renly. Cersei reacted as a mother before she reacted as a queen. She saw only that one of her children was being taken hundreds of miles away across the Red Mountains into a region she neither trusted nor understood. In one sense, her fear was irrational. Doran Martell proved far gentler toward Myrcella than many courtiers within King's Landing treated Sansa Stark. In another sense, however, her concern reflected genuine experience. She knew children of great houses often became bargaining pieces in struggles they never chose. She herself had once been married for politics rather than affection. The difference was that Tyrion measured kingdoms while Cersei measured family. Their arguments often sound intensely personal, yet beneath every insult lies an important philosophical disagreement. Tyrion believed rulers must sometimes sacrifice private desires to preserve the realm. Cersei believed the realm existed to preserve her family. Those priorities occasionally produced identical decisions, but just as often they collided violently. Neither sibling lacked intelligence. They simply answered different questions before making every choice. Tyrion asked what strengthened the kingdom. Cersei asked what protected House Lannister. Even so, there were moments when Cersei identified dangers before Tyrion did. She repeatedly warned that Stannis Baratheon should never be underestimated. She understood that Robert's elder brother possessed relentless determination, naval strength centered upon Dragonstone, and the legal claim that many lords would consider strongest after Joffrey's legitimacy came into question. Tyrion respected Stannis, but focused increasingly upon immediate defenses inside King's Landing. Cersei thought further ahead, worrying not only about armies, but about what would happen if those armies breached the gates. As ravens continued to arrive from every corner of Westeros, the shadow of war crept steadily toward the capital. Renly Baratheon had crowned himself at Highgarden with the support of House Tyrell. Robb Stark remained undefeated in the field after victories against Jaime Lannister. Stannis Baratheon prepared his fleet while gathering sworn swords beneath the fiery banners of the Lord of Light. Inside the Red Keep, brother and sister continued trying to outmaneuver one another, scarcely realizing that before long they would have no choice except to stand upon the same walls and defend the same city together. Why did Cersei prepare for defeat more carefully than many commanders prepared for victory? The answer becomes visible as the fleet of Stannis Baratheon finally leaves Dragonstone and sails toward the mouth of the Blackwater Rush. By the middle of 299 AC, Renly Baratheon had been assassinated in his own camp beneath the walls of Storm's End, an event surrounded by shadow and mystery in the novels and tied to the sorcery of Melisandre of Ashai. Much of Renly's strength passed to House Tyrell after negotiations with Petyr Baelish, while a substantial portion of his Storm Lords followed Stannis instead. The younger Baratheon brother was dead, but the elder now possessed the strongest legal claim to the Iron Throne and an army determined to enforce it. Stannis approached King's Landing with advantages that few invaders had ever possessed. He had served for years as master of ships under Robert and knew the city's harbor, walls, tides, and weaknesses intimately. His fleet, commanded by Ser Imry Florent, vastly outnumbered the Royal Navy after many captains declared for Dragonstone. Veteran knights such as Ser Guyard Morrigan, Sir Richard Horpe, and Sir Roland Storm marched beneath his fiery banners, while Melisandre's growing influence inspired many followers with absolute certainty that their cause carried divine approval. Tyrion recognized the danger immediately. Cersei had never stopped fearing it. Inside King's Landing, preparations unfolded day and night. Tyrion strengthened the Mudgate, organized the chain that would later trap enemy ships inside the Blackwater, and ordered great quantities of wildfire from the Guild of Alchemists. The substance itself had a long and terrible history, especially under King Aerys II Targaryen, who had hidden caches throughout King's Landing while imagining he would burn his enemies alive. Halane the Pyromancer supervised fresh production for the defense of the city. Green fire accumulated beneath towers, within cellars, and aboard selected vessels waiting to become floating traps. Cersei watched these preparations closely, but her attention drifted repeatedly toward another question. What happens if every defense fails? That concern separated her from many rulers who focused exclusively upon winning battles. She considered surrender, escape, assassination, hostage negotiations, and the survival of her children long before the first enemy banner appeared across the river. In military terms, she built contingency after contingency. Even readers who disagree with many of her choices often overlook how unusual that habit was among Westerosi nobles, who frequently preferred glorious optimism to uncomfortable planning. Why did Cersei insist upon remaining inside Maegor's holdfast, rather than standing proudly upon the battlements beside the defenders? Critics within the story interpreted her decision as cowardice, yet the situation was more complicated. Maegor's holdfast formed the innermost fortress of the Red Keep, protected by thick walls and drawbridges designed during the reign of Maegor the Cruel. It sheltered the royal children, noble ladies, and members of the court whose capture would cripple the monarchy. If Stannis seized the outer defenses, this final refuge might still hold long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Within those walls, Cersei gathered Queen Selyse Florent's absent counterpart in strange fashion. Not another queen, but frightened noble women awaiting news from husbands and fathers fighting beyond the gates. Sansa Stark remained among them, still technically betrothed to King Joffrey despite everything that had happened since Eddard Stark's execution. Septas prayed. Ladies whispered rumors carried by frightened servants. Outside bells rang across the city as soldiers hurried toward the walls. The atmosphere became increasingly heavy, not with panic alone, but with waiting. The conversations between Cersei and Sansa during these chapters reveal a queen far more reflective than the one many viewers remember from the television adaptation. Wine loosened Cersei's tongue. She spoke bluntly about marriage, power, and the illusions surrounding chivalry. She told Sansa that tears could become a woman's weapon when swords belonged to men. She admitted that songs lied about happy endings and honorable knights. These moments are not gentle, yet they expose a mind shaped by bitter experience rather than simple cruelty. Cersei rarely offered comfort, but she sometimes offered uncomfortable truths. Then came one of the darkest decisions of her life. She ordered Ser Ilyn Payne to remain close to Prince Tommen if the castle fell. The implication was unmistakable. Tommen was not to be captured alive. In the books, Cersei keeps poison hidden for herself as well, preferring death to humiliation at the hands of Stannis Baratheon or his supporters. She remembered all too clearly what had happened to Princess Elia Martell after the sack of King's Landing in 283 AC. She knew what victorious armies sometimes did when royal blood changed hands. Was this simple despair, or was it another expression of the relentless logic that had guided Cersei since childhood? In her mind, capture did not merely threaten individuals. It threatened dynasties. A living prince could become a hostage, a claimant, or a puppet controlled by rival lords. A dead prince could not legitimize another king's rule. The calculation is chilling. Yet it follows patterns found throughout Westerosi history, where disputed successions often ended only when competing heirs disappeared. Cersei reached a conclusion few parents could endure even imagining, and that willingness to confront the worst possibilities reveals as much about her intelligence as any victory in court. Outside the castle, Tyrion rode through smoke, mud, and burning pitch to direct the city's defense personally. King Joffrey appeared briefly upon the walls before returning to safety after Cersei insisted he should not risk capture or death. The Queen has often been criticized for removing him from public view, but from a dynastic perspective, her reasoning was sound. If Joffrey died during the assault, the Lannister claim would immediately pass to Tommen amid chaos. Preserving the king mattered more than preserving appearances. The battle reached its turning point when Stannis' fleet entered the river beneath the great chain stretched across the Blackwater. At Tyrion's command, wildfire ignited among the trapped ships. Green flames exploded across the water with terrifying speed, consuming timber, sails, flesh, and even the surface of the river itself. Yet Stannis did not retreat. He landed west of the city despite catastrophic losses and personally led his soldiers toward the walls. Few commanders in Westerosi history displayed greater determination under impossible conditions. As the sounds of steel echoed through the night and the sky glowed with unnatural green fire, Cersei waited inside Magore's holdfast with poison hidden close at hand and her youngest son beside her. She had spent years mastering court intrigue, outwitting rivals, and protecting House Lannister through calculation rather than courage on the battlefield. Now every clever decision she had ever made rested upon one final uncertainty. Intelligence could prepare for disaster. It could not guarantee that disaster would be avoided before dawn. Why did Cersei survive the Battle of the Blackwater with her throne intact, yet emerge politically weaker than before the fighting began? At first glance, the battle appears to end in complete victory for House Lannister. Stannis Baratheon's assault failed. King's Landing remained unconquered. Joffrey kept his crown. Yet wars are not decided only by who still occupies a castle at sunrise. They are also shaped by who receives the glory, who earns gratitude, and who quietly loses influence while celebrating success. On that battlefield, Cersei protected the dynasty, but the triumph itself elevated others above her. The decisive moment arrived not within the city walls, but along the King's Road west of King's Landing. Lord Tywin Lannister, having abandoned Harrenhal after learning of Stannis' advance, marched rapidly toward the capital. Beside him rode Lord Mace Tyrell and the Strength of the Reach, an alliance secured through Peter Baelish's negotiations following Renly Baratheon's death. Sir Garland Tyrell famously wore Renly's armor during part of the advance, adding confusion among Stannis' weary soldiers in the darkness. When fresh cavalry struck the exhausted attackers from the rear, while Tyrion's defenders still held the walls, the battle turned decisively against Dragonstone. Stannis Baratheon escaped aboard the remaining ships of his shattered fleet. Thousands of his followers did not. Some drowned beneath burning wreckage trapped by Tyrion's great chain. Others fell beneath the swords of Lannister and Tyrell knights outside the city gates. Sir Geard Morrigan died fighting. Sir Imry Florent's fleet had already been destroyed by wildfire. Even after overwhelming losses, Stannis refused surrender and withdrew to Dragonstone, determined to continue the war. His defeat demonstrated extraordinary resilience as much as military failure. Within King's Landing, however, another struggle began almost immediately. The people celebrated Lord Tywin as the savior of the city. Songs praised the Hand who arrived at the perfect moment with the banners of the Lion and the Rose. Tyrion's role, though substantial, remained partially hidden beneath the dramatic arrival of his father. Cersei recognized the pattern at once. Public memory rarely rewarded those who prepared defenses. It remembered those who appeared when victory became visible. She had survived the siege, but she understood that influence inside House Lannister was shifting once again toward Tywin. Why did Tywin return to the capital with greater authority than ever before, despite having spent most of the battle far from the walls? The answer reflects one of his oldest political habits. Tywin preferred decisive conclusions over prolonged uncertainty. His arrival accomplished more than defeating Stannis. It restored confidence among merchants, stabilized noble loyalties, and reminded every counselor that the true head of House Lannister had returned. Once again he assumed the office of Hand of the King, quietly displacing Tyrion from the position that had allowed the younger brother unprecedented authority. For Cersei, this reunion with her father brought mixed emotions. She admired Tywin more deeply than any other living person, yet she also longed for his approval in ways he seldom encouraged. Tywin praised results rather than effort. The defense of King's Landing had succeeded, but not through Cersei's political brilliance alone. Tyrion had organized the city's preparations. The Tyrell alliance had rescued the capital. Tywin himself had delivered the final blow. Cersei remained queen regent, yet she increasingly found herself surrounded by powerful men whose achievements threatened to eclipse her own. One of Tywin's first major decisions after the battle illustrates his relentless practicality. Rather than continuing endless warfare against every rival simultaneously, he strengthened the alliance with House Tyrell through marriage. King Joffrey's engagement to Sansa Stark was broken despite northern outrage. Instead, Joffrey would marry Margaery Tyrell, daughter of Lord Mace Tyrell and sister to Sir Loras Tyrell. Sansa herself would later become part of another dynastic arrangement. Marriage, in Tywin's hands, functioned as another military campaign conducted with wedding cloaks instead of swords. How did Cersei react to the arrival of Margaery Tyrell, the young woman who unknowingly stepped into the shadow of Maggie the Frog's prophecy? In the published novels, Cersei's deepest suspicion grows gradually rather than exploding immediately. She sees Margaery's beauty, popularity, and effortless ability to charm both nobles and commoners. Crowds cheer when the Tyrells distribute food during shortages. Young knights compete eagerly for Margaery's attention. Joffrey himself becomes captivated. These developments would trouble many queens. For Cersei, they awakened memories she had carried since childhood. Maggie had foretold that another queen, younger and more beautiful, would cast Cersei down and take from her everything she held dear. Readers continue debating whether Margaery truly fulfills that prophecy or merely appears to do so in Cersei's increasingly fearful mind. The books never provide a definitive answer. What matters politically is that Cersei begins interpreting ordinary court events through the lens of an old prediction. A smile becomes manipulation. Popularity becomes conspiracy. Every compliment directed toward Margaery feels like another stone removed from beneath Cersei's own throne. Yet even before paranoia fully takes hold, Cersei correctly identifies a genuine shift in power. House Tyrell does not arrive as a subordinate ally. It arrives bringing grain from the fertile reach, immense financial resources, experienced commanders such as Randyll Tarly, and one of the largest surviving armies in Westeros. King's Landing desperately needs food after months of war. Hungry cities grow restless, and restless cities become dangerous. The Tyrells can provide stability in ways House Lannister alone no longer can. Cersei sees this clearly, and that clarity makes her increasingly uneasy. Why do so many readers underestimate Cersei simply because several of her later decisions prove disastrous? Intelligence and judgment are not identical qualities. During the aftermath of Blackwater, she accurately perceives nearly every major political threat before others openly acknowledge it. She understands that the Tyrell alliance will eventually compete with Lannister influence inside the royal household. She senses that Joffrey's impulsiveness remains a danger despite military victory. She realizes that Tyrion's popularity among soldiers has grown after the battle, even though his father has reclaimed formal authority. Her observations are often correct. The trouble lies in how she chooses to respond to them. As the smoke finally clears above the Blackwater rush, workmen begin repairing shattered gates, removing burned wreckage from the river, and burying the dead outside the city walls. Bells ring in celebration instead of alarm. Merchants cautiously reopen their shops. The Iron Throne has survived its greatest test since Robert's Rebellion, yet the game inside the Red Keep has merely entered another phase. The enemies outside the walls have been driven back. The rivals now gathering around Cersei's own table will prove far more difficult to defeat. Why would one of the most politically cautious figures in the Seven Kingdoms willingly restore an armed religious order that previous kings had abolished nearly 3 centuries earlier? At first glance, the decision seems impossible to explain. The faith militant had been dissolved during the reign of King Jaehaerys, the first Targaryen, after years of bloody conflict between the Iron Throne and the faith of the Seven. Since then, the warriors' sons and the poor fellows had existed only in chronicles and songs. Every ruler who understood history knew why they had disappeared. Yet Cersei eventually chose to bring them back. To understand that decision, it is important to follow the changes that occurred after the deaths of both Joffrey Baratheon and Tywin Lannister. Joffrey was poisoned during the wedding feast, remembered as the Purple Wedding, shortly after marrying Margaery Tyrell in the Great Sept of Baelor. The novels leave the conspiracy deliberately layered, but Peter Baelish later claims responsibility while revealing that Olenna Tyrell participated in the assassination to protect her granddaughter from Joffrey's cruelty. Tyrion Lannister was falsely accused, imprisoned, and ultimately escaped with the help of Jaime. Before fleeing across the narrow sea, Tyrion murdered his father, Lord Tywin, with a crossbow in the privy of the Tower of the Hand. Tywin's death altered the balance of power more profoundly than almost any battlefield victory could have done. He had served as the center of gravity for House Lannister, restraining Cersei, directing Jaime when necessary, and intimidating rival houses through reputation alone. Once he was gone, Tommen Baratheon inherited the crown. While still a child, Cersei again became Queen Regent, but this time she ruled without the father whose authority had quietly supported her own. She gained freedom. She also lost the one advisor capable of refusing her wishes without fear. Why did Cersei begin surrounding herself with lesser men instead of experienced counselors? The answer reveals one of the subtle ways intelligence can undermine itself. Throughout her life, she had watched gifted figures overshadow her. Jon Arryn guided Robert. Tyrion received praise after Blackwater. Tywin dominated every council chamber he entered. Cersei concluded that capable subordinates eventually became rivals. Rather than appoint another towering statesman, she increasingly preferred men who appeared loyal because they lacked the confidence or reputation to challenge her. The composition of her small council changed accordingly. Lord Giles Rosby, chronically ill and barely able to finish a sentence without coughing, remained useful precisely because he inspired little political ambition. Oraine Waters, a handsome young bastard of House Valerian, rose rapidly because Cersei believed she could trust him. Orton Merryweather became Hand after Tywin's death despite limited experience in governing the realm. Qyburn, expelled from the Citadel for conducting forbidden experiments upon living men, replaced Grand Maester Pycelle in many practical matters because Cersei valued results over orthodoxy. Each appointment made sense individually. Together, they steadily weakened the government. This is where many readers begin describing Circe as foolish, yet the picture deserves greater nuance. Her reasoning followed a recognizable political principle. Powerful ministers often overshadow weak monarchs. Throughout real and fictional history alike, rulers have feared becoming prisoners of their own advisors. Circe sought to avoid that fate by ensuring ultimate authority remained in her own hands. The flaw lay not in recognizing the danger. The flaw lay in assuming competence, and independence could never exist together. Why did she believe the faith of the Seven could become a useful weapon against House Tyrell? The answer begins with money rather than religion. Years of war had left the crown buried beneath extraordinary debt owed to House Lannister, the Iron Bank of Bravos, and the faith itself. The High Septon, who had served under Tywin, died, and a far more austere religious movement emerged among common people exhausted by violence, famine, and corruption. At its center stood the humble Septon, who would become known simply as the High Sparrow. Unlike many previous High Septons, the High Sparrow possessed little interest in luxury or courtly ceremony. He walked barefoot, dressed plainly, and gathered enormous moral authority by caring personally for refugees created by the War of the Five Kings. Thousands of peasants had lost homes as armies marched repeatedly through the riverlands. Villages had burned. Harvests had failed. Broken men wandered the roads. While great lords argued over crowns, the faith fed the hungry and buried the dead. Circe underestimated how much goodwill those actions had earned. She believed she saw an opportunity. If the crown restored the faith, militant, the High Sparrow would receive armed protectors and renewed prestige. In return, Circe expected the faith to investigate and weaken Marguerite Tyrell and her powerful family. From a narrow tactical perspective, the exchange seemed attractive. The Tyrells had become indispensable after Blackwater. They controlled food entering King's Landing, influenced young King Tommen, and enjoyed growing popularity among the people. Circe wanted another institution capable of balancing their power. Why did this calculation differ so sharply from earlier successes against rivals like Eddard Stark or Tyrion? Because the faith could not be bribed in the same way as Janos Slynt, or manipulated through dynastic ambition like many great houses. The High Sparrow sought moral authority, not castles. His followers embraced poverty instead of wealth. They measured legitimacy according to religious law rather than noble lineage. Circe attempted to play the same political game she had mastered for decades, but she was now confronting an opponent who accepted entirely different rules. Even before events turned openly against her, small warning signs appeared. The faith questioned noble behavior without regard for family name. Lords and ladies found themselves answering uncomfortable accusations before humble septons. The warriors' sons and poor fellows once again carried weapons through the streets of King's Landing, not as servants of the crown, but as servants of the Seven. Circe noticed these developments, yet remained convinced she could redirect the movement whenever necessary. She believed she had created a powerful new piece upon the board. As evening bells echoed across the city and worshippers climbed the worn steps of the great sept of Baelor, the queen looked upon the faith as another alliance carefully constructed through political necessity. She had outmaneuvered kings, hands, and counselors by understanding their desires more clearly than they understood her own. This time, however, she had invited into the game an institution older than House Lannister itself, one whose loyalty could never truly be purchased, and whose judgment would soon reach far closer to the Iron Throne than she ever intended. Why did Cersei, who had correctly anticipated so many political dangers for decades, fail to recognize that the greatest threat in King's Landing had become the very institution she had empowered? The answer lies in a subtle shift that unfolded inside her own thinking. Earlier in her life, Cersei treated rivals as individuals with specific ambitions that could be exploited or redirected. By the time she ruled for Tommen, she increasingly believed every opponent sought power in exactly the same way she understood power. The High Sparrow did not. His authority rested upon belief, and belief proved far more difficult to manipulate than ambition. The faith moved carefully before striking openly. Margaery Tyrell and several of her cousins, including Mega Tyrell, Alla Tyrell, and Eleanor Tyrell, were questioned regarding accusations of adultery and sexual misconduct. These charges emerged largely through the testimony of Osney Kettleblack, one of three brothers, Osmond, Osfrid, and Osney, whom Cersei herself had elevated within the court. The Kettleblacks had originally entered royal service through Peter Baelish, a detail that should have inspired caution. Instead, Cersei convinced herself that they belonged entirely to her. It was another example of her growing tendency to mistake temporary usefulness for permanent loyalty. The scheme itself reflected her earlier successes. Cersei intended Osney Kettleblack to seduce Queen Margaery and then confess the affair to the faith, destroying House Tyrell's influence over Tommen. It resembled previous strategies built upon rumor, carefully directed testimony, and political theater. Had everything proceeded according to plan, Margaery might have faced disgrace while the Tyrell alliance fractured from within. The flaw emerged because the High Sparrow refused to become merely another instrument of royal policy. He insisted upon investigating every accusation regardless of who benefited. Then came the confession Cersei never anticipated. Rather than repeating the story she expected, Osney admitted under questioning that he had lied. Worse still, he confessed to sleeping with Queen Cersei herself and acknowledged involvement in the murder of the previous High Septon. Whether every detail reflected literal truth or statements extracted under immense religious pressure remains debated by readers, but politically, the result mattered far more than absolute certainty. The accusations now pointed directly toward the Queen. Why did the High Sparrow dare arrest the mother of the king? Earlier generations might have considered such an act impossible. Yet by restoring the faith militant, Cersei had voluntarily surrendered one of the monarchy's greatest historical advantages, its monopoly on organized force within King's Landing. Armed warriors, sons, and poor fellows now answered to the faith rather than the crown. Tommen himself hesitated to attack the Great Sept with royal soldiers, fearing civil conflict between throne and religion. The restraint that reflected his gentle nature became Cersei's prison. She was seized and confined within the Great Sept of Baelor, the magnificent structure completed during the reign of King Baelor I Targaryen, built of pale marble atop Visenya's hill, crowned with crystal domes that glittered above the city. The Sept had long symbolized both royal piety and the influence of the faith. For Cersei, those familiar halls became a place of humiliation rather than ceremony. Stripped of rich gowns and jewels, Denied wine, isolated from her household, she encountered a form of authority that could not be bribed with castles or intimidated by family name. The chapters describing her imprisonment reveal one of the most psychologically detailed portraits George R.R. Martin has written. Circe remembers Joanna. She remembers Maggie's prophecy. She thinks constantly of Jaime, Tommen, and the enemies she imagines surrounding them. Hunger, exhaustion, and uncertainty gradually erode the certainty that had defined her for years. Yet even in confinement, she continues searching for patterns, motives, and opportunities. Her mind never truly stops calculating. The prison walls limit her body far more effectively than they limit her political instincts. Why did Circe eventually choose confession after resisting so fiercely? The answer was not surrender in the ordinary sense. The High Sparrow offered a carefully structured compromise. If Circe admitted certain acts, primarily her adultery with cousins such as Sir Lancel Lannister after Robert's death and other moral failings, the faith would allow her to return temporarily to the Red Keep, while postponing judgment on the far more serious accusations of incest and regicide. She accepted because she recognized the distinction between losing one battle and losing the entire war. Survival came first. Lancel's role in this tragedy deserves particular attention. Once a vain and impressionable young knight eager for Circe's approval, he emerged profoundly changed after wounds suffered during the Battle of the Blackwater. Guilt over his affair with the queen, combined with his near-death experience, drove him toward sincere religious devotion. He joined the warrior's sons and embraced an austere life of penance. The very man Circe had once manipulated through vanity became one of the witnesses strengthening the faith's case against her. Once again, an ally transformed into an adversary because she had mistaken temporary obedience for lasting loyalty. The walk of atonement that followed stands among the most unforgettable sequences in the novels. Barefoot, stripped of clothing, her hair shorn away by the septas, Circe crossed the streets from the Great Sept to the Red Keep, while the people of King's Landing shouted insults, curses, prayers, and mockery. Some threw refuse, others simply watched. The route itself passed through neighborhoods she'd ruled for years without truly understanding the lives of those who lived there. Now every stone beneath her feet reminded her that a queen ultimately depends upon the judgments of ordinary people as much as upon the swords of noble houses. Yet even at the end of that terrible journey, Circe was not defeated in the way many expected. Waiting within the Red Keep stood Sir Robert Strong, the enormous silent knight provided by Qyburn, whose true identity the novels deliberately leave unconfirmed while heavily implying a connection to Sir Gregor Clegane after his death from Oberyn Martell's poisoned spear. The faith had humbled the queen, but it had not broken her will. Bruised, exhausted, and stripped of nearly everything except determination, Circe entered the castle with one lesson burned more deeply into her memory than any prophecy. Intelligence alone had never guaranteed victory. It merely ensured that when she fell, she immediately began searching for the next move. Why do so many discussions of Cersei Lannister treat the television adaptation and the novels as though they tell the same story, when by the end of A Dance with Dragons they have already become profoundly different? This difference matters because it changes how we judge her intelligence. In the published books, Cersei has not destroyed the great sept of Baelor, has not eliminated the Tyrell leadership with wildfire, and has not crowned herself queen in her own right after Tommen's death. Those events belong to the television adaptation. George R.R.R. Martin leaves her in a far more uncertain and politically complex position, preparing for a trial that has yet to occur. At the close of A Dance with Dragons, Cersei has returned to the Red Keep after her Walk of Atonement, but she is hardly secure. The Faith continues pursuing accusations of incest, regicide, and adultery. King Tommen remains alive, gentle, impressionable, and increasingly influenced by those around him. Margaery Tyrell has also been released temporarily while awaiting her own trial before the Faith. House Tyrell still commands enormous military resources through Mace Tyrell and Randall Tarley. Nothing has been decisively resolved. Martin deliberately leaves every major political force balanced against the others. That unfinished position invites a more careful reading of Cersei than the adaptation often encourages. She is neither an unstoppable mastermind nor a reckless fool stumbling blindly from mistake to mistake. Instead, she occupies the uncomfortable space between those extremes. She recognizes genuine dangers with remarkable consistency, yet she often chooses methods of confronting them that create even greater dangers. Her perception remains sharp long after her judgment begins to falter. Those are not identical qualities, and Martin repeatedly separates them. Why did Kevan Lannister, one of the most experienced statesmen in Westeros, conclude that Cersei herself had become a danger to House Lannister? The answer appears in the epilogue of A Dance with Dragons. After Cersei's imprisonment, Kevan reluctantly returns to King's Landing to restore order at the request of Grand Maester Pycelle and others who believe only he possesses the authority to stabilize the realm. He dismisses several of Cersei's favorites, works toward repairing relations with House Tyrell, and quietly begins undoing many of the decisions that had deepened the crisis. Kevin's perspective is especially valuable because he loves his family without sharing Tywin's severity or Cersei's pride. He does not doubt her intelligence. He doubts her discipline. He reflects that Cersei surrounds herself with flatterers, distrusts competent advisors, and increasingly mistakes personal insults for existential threats. His assessment carries weight precisely because it is not spoken by an enemy. It comes from a loyal uncle who has watched House Lannister rise from regional dominance to control of the Iron Throne. Yet Martin complicates even Kevan's judgment almost immediately. Before Kevan can complete his reforms, Varys emerges from hiding within the Red Keep and murders both Grand Maester Pycelle and Kevan himself. The Spider explains his motives with chilling clarity. Westeros, he says, must remain divided, unstable, and leaderless to prepare the way for the young man presented as Aegon Targaryen, who lands in the Stormlands with the Golden Company during A Dance with Dragons. Whether this claimant truly is Prince Aegon, son of Rhaegar Targaryen, remains one of the saga's great unresolved questions. What matters here is that Kevan's sensible government is destroyed not because it fails, but because it begins succeeding. This twist forces readers to reconsider Cersei's earlier failures. Some disasters genuinely resulted from her own decisions. Others became catastrophes because hidden players such as Varys and Petter Baelish continually reshaped the board beneath everyone's feet. Even Tywin himself failed to perceive the full scope of Varys's conspiracy. Jon Arryn never uncovered it. Tyrion did not unravel it either. Cersei certainly underestimated Varys, but so did nearly every other statesman in the Seven Kingdoms. That context does not excuse her mistakes. It does remind us that she played in a game whose rules were more complicated than anyone realized. Why does Jaime's gradual separation from Cersei matter so much to understanding her final trajectory? Throughout the early novels, Jaime functions as the one person whose loyalty she never questions. After losing his sword hand to Vargo Hoat's brave companions and traveling with Brienne of Tarth, however, Jaime begins changing in ways Cersei neither expects nor welcomes. He starts reflecting seriously upon honor, duty, and the legacy of the Kingsguard. He refuses several requests that he once would have obeyed without hesitation. The emotional certainty that had anchored Cersei since childhood slowly begins slipping away. One of the quietest, yet most significant moments occurs when Cersei sends Jaime an urgent letter begging him to return and champion her against the Faith. By this point, Sir Robert Strong already exists, but Cersei still longs for Jaime's support. Jaime receives the message while campaigning in the Riverlands after the fall of River Run. He reads the letter, thinks for a moment, and throws it into the fire. The gesture is understated, almost gentle, yet symbolically devastating. For the first time in their lives, Jaime consciously chooses another path instead of hers. Even so, Cersei remains remarkably resilient. Few characters in the novels survive as many political disasters while retaining the will to continue fighting. She loses Robert, Joffrey, Tywin, much of her public reputation, and the unquestioned obedience of her court. She endures imprisonment, humiliation, and growing isolation. Still, she continues planning, adapting, and searching for another route back to influence. That relentless persistence explains why she remains compelling even when readers disagree with nearly every decision she makes. As night settles once more over King's Landing, the towers of the Red Keep look much as they did when Robert first rode through their gates years earlier. Torches flicker along the walls. Ravens sleep beneath the eaves. Somewhere within those ancient chambers, a queen who has been brought lower than she ever imagined still studies the board before her. Many of her pieces have been captured. Several of her greatest assumptions have failed. Yet the game itself has not ended, and Cersei Lannister has never believed that defeat means the final move has been played. Was Cersei Lannister truly the smartest player in the Game of Thrones? Or does history remember only the spectacular failures that came after years of remarkable political success? It is an uncomfortable question because Martin's world rarely rewards simple answers. If intelligence is measured by surviving impossible situations, anticipating threats before others recognize them, and repeatedly climbing back into power after devastating setbacks, Cersei belongs among the most formidable political minds of her generation. If intelligence is measured by knowing when to trust, when to compromise, and when to abandon a strategy that no longer serves its purpose, her record becomes far more troubled. The tension between those two truths is precisely what makes her one of the richest characters in A Song of Ice and Fire. Consider the sequence of achievements that often disappears beneath discussions of her later mistakes. She concealed the parentage of 3 royal children for nearly 2 decades, despite living at the center of the most scrutinized court in Westeros. She recognized Eddard Stark as a genuine danger before most members of the small council appreciated the threat he posed. She acted decisively after Robert Baratheon's death while more honorable rivals hesitated. She survived the political struggle with Tyrion, the Battle of the Blackwater, Joffrey's murder, Tywin's death, and public humiliation at the hands of the Faith. Many celebrated lords and kings perished after a single disastrous decision. Cersei endured crisis after crisis and remained a central figure in the struggle for power. She also understood several realities that other rulers consistently ignored. Robert Baratheon believed military victory alone guaranteed stability. It did not. Eddard Stark believed truth naturally produced justice. It did not. Renly Baratheon believed popularity outweighed lawful succession. That proved false as well. Even Stannis Baratheon, despite his relentless discipline, underestimated the importance of political flexibility. Cersei saw that fear, appearances, perception, family, wealth, and rumor often mattered just as much as armies. She grasped the invisible mechanics of power with unusual clarity. Why then did so many of her victories eventually become the seeds of later defeats? One answer lies in the gradual transformation of confidence into certainty. Early Cersei studies opponents patiently. She watches Robert's habits before acting. She measures Ned Stark carefully. She evaluates the ambitions of Janos Slynt, Petyr Baelish, and others before relying upon them. Later, Cersei increasingly assumes her first judgment is always correct. Instead of testing assumptions, she begins defending them. Intelligence without self-correction slowly hardens into something far less reliable. Maggie the Frog's prophecy also deserves one final consideration. Readers continue debating whether prophecy in Martin's world predicts the future or merely influences those who hear it. Cersei provides perhaps the strongest evidence for the second possibility. Her fear of the younger, more beautiful queen shapes countless political decisions. Her obsession with protecting her children intensifies because she remembers golden shrouds waiting in the future. The prophecy never forces her hand. It whispers constantly, while she chooses where to place each piece upon the board. That distinction matters because tragedy in Martin's world so often emerges from human choice rather than supernatural destiny alone. There is another irony that becomes visible only after following Cersei's life from childhood to the closing chapters of A Dance with Dragons. She spent decades fighting against limitations imposed by her sex in a society that privileged sons over daughters. In many respects, she succeeded brilliantly. She exercised more direct influence over the Iron Throne than countless kings' wives before her. She governed during wars, negotiated alliances, directed councils, and altered the fate of kingdoms. Yet she often embraced the harshest lessons taught by the very patriarchal system she resisted. She admired Tywin's ruthlessness more than Joanna's diplomacy. She trusted fear more readily than affection. The methods she inherited ultimately imprisoned her almost as thoroughly as the expectations she rebelled against. The unfinished nature of the novels encourages humility when judging her story. We do not yet know the outcome of her trial before the faith. We do not know how she will respond to the arrival of the young man claiming to be Aegon VI Targaryen. We do not know what role Daenerys Targaryen and her dragons will eventually play in King's Landing, nor how Jaime's path will intersect with Cersei's once again. The television adaptation provides one possible conclusion for its own version of the character, but Martin has repeatedly demonstrated that his roads often lead elsewhere. Any final judgment must therefore remain provisional until the remaining books appear. Perhaps the better question is not whether Cersei was the smartest player, but what kind of intelligence she actually possessed. Tyrion excelled at solving immediate problems through wit and improvisation. Tywin mastered logistics, intimidation, and long-term planning. Varys cultivated patience over decades. Petyr Baelish manipulated chaos itself, climbing from the smallest of noble houses toward extraordinary influence. Cersei's gift lay elsewhere. She possessed an instinctive understanding of status, legitimacy, perception, and the emotional currents flowing beneath formal politics. When those instincts aligned with disciplined judgment, she became extraordinarily dangerous. When fear and pride overwhelmed them, the same instincts began leading her astray. And so we return to the quiet chamber, where a single candle once burned, long after the rest of the Red Keep had fallen asleep. The wax has nearly reached the base of its holder now, pooling around cold bronze in pale circles. Beyond the narrow windows, Blackwater Bay lies calm beneath the stars, and the towers of King's Landing stand as they have through kings, rebellions, sieges, and prophecies. Somewhere within those ancient walls, a queen sits awake while others sleep, turning over possibilities that no one else has yet imagined. Whether history remembers her as its greatest strategist or as the architect of her own downfall, one truth remains difficult to deny. Very few people in Westeros ever understood the game as deeply as Cersei Lannister, and fewer still changed its course so profoundly. If you linger beside these stories long enough, you begin to notice that George R. Martin rarely asks whether someone is clever. He asks what that cleverness is serving. Intelligence in Westeros is never a simple virtue. It can preserve a family, rescue a kingdom, conceal a terrible secret, or justify a terrible crime. Cersei Lannister understood power with extraordinary clarity, but power itself was never the destination she truly sought. Beneath every scheme, every alliance, every calculated risk stood the same quiet desire that had followed her since childhood at Casterly Rock: to live in a world where no one could ever again decide her fate simply because she had been born a daughter instead of a son. That longing gives her story its strange sadness. She fought against a system that underestimated women, yet she gradually adopted many of the system's harshest beliefs. She learned from Tywin that fear commanded obedience. She learned from Robert that affection could disappear overnight. She learned from prophecy that the future could be stolen before it arrived. Each lesson contained a fragment of truth, but no fragment ever became the whole truth. By the time she sat upon the council as Queen Regent, she had become strong enough to command kingdoms, yet increasingly unable to imagine that loyalty might grow from anything except fear, advantage, or necessity. Martin's histories return again and again to this same pattern. The wall was not built by one generation alone. Harrenhal was not ruined in a single hour without centuries of ambition leading toward it. The doom of Valyria did not erase an empire that believed itself vulnerable. Great houses rise because they master one challenge, then often fall because they continue using yesterday's answers against tomorrow's problems. House Stark trusts honor until honor becomes a weapon in another man's hand. House Targaryen trusts dragons until dragons destroy their own family. House Lannister trusts wealth and authority until neither can purchase certainty. Every triumph quietly plants the roots of another trial, just as every defeat leaves behind lessons that may one day become strength. That is why Cersei remains so compelling, even unfinished. She is not simply a warning against pride, nor merely an example of ambition consuming itself. She is a reminder that seeing danger clearly does not guarantee choosing the right response to it. She recognized threats that wiser and kinder people overlooked. She understood the kingdoms are built as much upon perception as upon stone walls and sharpened swords. Yet she could never fully escape the fear that every gain was temporary, every ally conditional, every smile concealing betrayal. In trying to stay one step ahead of the future, she often hurried toward the very future she feared most. Perhaps that is the quiet truth hidden beneath so many of Martin's greatest characters. The throne is rarely the true prize. Men and women believe they are fighting for crowns, castles, or songs that will outlive them. But beneath those ambitions, they are usually chasing something much smaller and much older: a parent's approval, a lost love, a promise made in youth, a wound that never healed, or the hope that one more victory will finally bring peace. The kingdoms of Westeros are shaped by armies and dragons, yet they are steered just as often by memories carried silently inside a single human heart. And now the candle has almost burned away. Its flame grows smaller, bending gently whenever the wind finds a narrow crack in the stone. Outside, Blackwater Bay lies quiet beneath the night, the towers of the Red Keep standing watch, exactly as they did when our journey began. The maps remain upon the table, the letters remain unopened, and somewhere beyond the sleeping halls, another ruler is already imagining tomorrow's moves. You leave the chamber as softly as you entered it, while the last light flickers across the carved lion upon the desk, then settles into silence with the coming dawn.